All right, peace and blessings, everybody. August the 18th, the year 2017. And listen to Scrocky just for a little bit, if you would, please.
Except for Mr. Anderson, his co-conspirator, putting Jimmy Johnson's name on here, who decided who was going to make this list and who his people were going to kill. And that's why that's important. So I urge the court, I have 2 minutes left, actually a minute 30, I urge the court to pay attention to Mr. Cox's testimony and the outright fallacies that he testified to during the trial, to pay attention to Agent Sutherland's interview of Mr. Cox.
To pay attention to Mr. Sutherland's interview of Mr. Cox. FBI agent Richard Sutherland, I've never found a photo of him, but he was interviewed, he interviewed Schaeffer Cox right after the takedown, right after the arrest, along with this guy, Scott Johnson. Scott Johnson was later killed when he went to arrest an individual in Tanana, and his teenage son came out and shot him. So these two officers were killed. They made a $250,000 memorial, looks like some sort of archway. So they spent $250,000 to honor these two officers, as well as they passed a bill giving their family members health benefits, I guess, for the remainder of their lives. The guy who shot him, his name was Nathaniel Congus. I have not been able to find out where he is. I would like to be able to write him a letter in prison and find out more about him. But if you guys can find out where Nathaniel Congus is and his prison address, please let me know. Anyway, if we go back to this video here, which I would like to play for you guys, I'm paying particularly close attention to Schaeffer Cox's interview with FBI agent Richard Sutherland. If you guys have been keeping up with the story, Schaeffer was running a Liberty Bell network, and he showed up at someone's house that had called for help, and he had a little 380 on him. He told the cop that he had a 380 within the 60 seconds of him meeting the cop, but they charged him with unlawful possession anyway, which is absolutely ridiculous. Okay, so Schaeffer Cox was going to go into the trial to defend himself using constitutional arguments, and you guessed it, if you've been keeping up with the story, they ban any arguments with what's called a motion in limine that says Schaeffer will not be able to use the Constitution to defend himself. So they banned the Constitution from the courtroom, the same thing they did with Ed and Elaine Brown, the same thing they did with Skylar Barbeau, Russell Landers, and others. So this is an exchange between Schaeffer Cox and FBI agent Richard Sutherland, and also Scott Johnson is in the room. Now he's dead, and you say you better not speak ill of the dead. He had an exemplary life. Scott Johnson was an order-taken Nazi, just like FBI Special Agent Richard Sutherland. You say, why do you say that? Because I'm going to show you the exchange in the conversation. And Schaeffer Cox asked FBI Special Agent Richard Sutherland, what do you think about them not letting the Constitution to be brought up in the courtroom? And I want you to listen very closely to what Richard Sutherland says. Scott Johnson is standing right there supporting his friend. And so both of them are all about following orders. They're not about justice and liberty and freedom and biblical and constitutional principles. They're not about that at all. They're about following orders, and this clip right here is going to prove it.
It's unnecessary infighting. I think if you just stick to the Bible, and you have a uncompromising willingness to accept it at face value, that you'd be surprised how many denominations could get along fine. And I see that in America, the Constitution sits as the same authoritative document for our system of government as the Bible ought to sit for the Christian, Judeo-Christian worldview religions. And I want to know what you think. What do you think of an order from a judge forbidding me from making any reference to or argument with respect to the Constitution. Don't you think that, I mean, what do you think about that?
I will tell you that it's certainly your right to be vehemently opposed to that. If a prosecutor files a motion in limine, which means they're seeking to keep a trial process within certain confines, they have a reason for filing that. If a judge hears that and decides to grant that or not, it's really not either one of our positions to comment on how a judge conducts his courtroom. If I was in your position and I was a defendant and I thought that in representing myself pro se, that the best way that I could defend myself was a certain legal strategy, and I felt like that strategy was taken away from me, then in that position I could certainly understand the frustration. But I don't mean to be rude, but I really don't care whether or not you showed up for court on the 14th. I mean, the fact you were a grown man who made a grown man's decision and you weren't going to show up under the circumstances that had been dictated to you, that was your decision to make. Now the remedy for that is a judge issues you a warrant and it becomes the sergeant's job at some point, or the troopers, to find you and take you into custody. Mm-hmm. The only reason we're doing that is not because we feel like the judge was right and you were wrong, but because within the system we operate in, a warrant was issued for you, and it's our job to find you and bring you under the jurisdiction of the court. So,
and I knew that's why I talked to Burke and Ron about it, to try to be respectful and on the up and up with you guys. But I mean, that's a moral and conscientious position that I felt and still feel like I need to take. That if the judge is forbidding all reference to the Constitution, well, you probably read a quote in the ADN or Associated Press that I said, you know, the judge, by signing an order forbidding all reference to the Constitution, has divested himself of all authority vested in him by that Constitution. And the law requires me to now resist him by all means necessary. What do you think about that statement?
I don't want to be rude again, but I don't really care.
Okay, he don't care, right? So FBI Special Agent Richard Sutherland, with Sergeant Scott Johnson standing right beside him, is just told by Schaeffer Cox that the reason he didn't show up in trial is because they banned the Constitution with a motion in limine and the judge approved it, so Schaeffer can't use the Constitution to defend himself. And the Constitution is what empowers the judge in the first place. And Schaeffer says, I have to resist that sort of behavior. And then FBI Special Agent says, I don't care. You know, let me tell you this. This is exactly the attitude of Nazi that were just order following Nazis. And so this is the problem we've got, is that U.S. troopers, FBI special agents, law enforcement officials all throughout this country, they don't care. They got a job to do. They got a paycheck to make. And if they get killed, they get $250,000 memorial arches, and they put us in prison, and they kill us. They shoot us in the head. Think about Jeffrey Winehouse. Think about what's happened to Russell Landers. Think about what's happened to Ed and Elaine Brown, Bryce Quellar, Skylar Barbeau. They ain't getting no $250,000 memorial arches, and their family's not getting health care. But, you know, if you side with the system and the judge bans the Constitution, then, hey, you get a tremendous amount of financial benefits, but you lose your soul. That's the way I think about it. I think Schaeffer did the right thing when he didn't show up for trial after the judge banned the U.S. Constitution. And the fact that FBI Special Agent Rick Sutherland said he don't care, that's proof that he's an order-following Nazi on a fast train to hell.